Welcome to another episode of What Else You Got with Mitch and Margot. I'm Mitch, she's Margot, and I think we have a part two to what we were talking about last week.
Yeah, we got so invested in the topic. We were just talking. So we need another episode. We started last week's episode with the quote, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And at a surface level, maybe, but we dove deeper, went on a tangent, followed a rabbit, chased a squirrel, and we barely got to the part of where you switch rooms, and then we stopped talking. So
Well,
maybe we can pick up there, or do you have another recap that you want to give?
I was going to add in a couple of details because we
Okay.
started with your quote, and somehow we drifted into uh, knowledge, intelligence, and smarts, lots of good stuff. And then we drifted into career changes and the different generational approaches to career progression. And then we got to the rooms. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're building off of.
Yeah. And I
And
totally got distracted because out my window I can see a body of water, and there is a kayaker out there. It's starting to warm up here. Is it warm where you are?
yeah, it's been 90 degrees for last week.
Ooh, we're supposed to get up to 78 this week. So kayakers are coming
Well,
out, paddleboarders.
tomorrow is supposed to get down to 60 as the daytime high.
It's still warmer than here today.
Yeah. But so picking back up where we left off. So changing rooms and being able to be let into the room. We talked about imposter syndrome, a little bit of discrimination, and how the majority of that discrimination comes from yourself not letting yourself be into the room.
Well, and we didn't really have a chance to talk about any of those things. We only touched on them. So I think a good place to start would probably be on the topic of who is letting you in the room or who is denying you entry, who gets to be that gatekeeper, and is it you or is it somebody else, and is it discriminatory, is is it something else? So let's talk about the gatekeeper.
Yeah. So just because we were talking about jobs and careers, I'll start with to get into a job room, you have to get past the interviewer, and
Yep.
the interviewer is looking for, are you a good culture fit? Do you have the required skills to get in? And do you have enough of a future to be let into join that room? And then you have various organizational ones that, do you pass a background check? And then drifting a little bit farther out of, do you uh, do you know where those groups are that you want to join?
I'll tell you what, I would never want to be a full-time HR professional. I do a little bit of HR work when we are hiring people. Well, let's be honest. I do a lot of HR generally because we don't have an HR person right now. Hopefully we will in the future. Um, but then that would be another job that I would need to interview people for. But anyway, off topic, kind of squirreling. Too many squirrels in my brain. I would never want to be a full-time HR professional. I think it is exhausting because that there's a ton of gatekeeping in that process because you are the one judging and determining whether or not somebody gets to come into the room.
So just because I know at what you described as a slightly different position, so it is HR adjacent, but it's known as a recruiter. And
Yes.
recruiter is the, yes, it is an HR role, but it's the, you have to filter through so many people and go, are you qualified? Are you not qualified? Because one of the things that drives me nuts is based off the job description you posted, I qualify, or I'm just short because I know you embellish on some of the parts.
It's exhausting. I'm
Hmm.
exhausted just thinking about it. And so that person, whatever title you give that person who is sifting through those resumes, deciding whether or not someone gets an interview, they are a gatekeeper. And then the people who conduct the interviews, they are gatekeepers to determine whether or not those applicants will be let into that particular room. And so when we're talking about being the smartest person in the room or moving to another room, how do you get into the other room? I remember doing an interview with somebody quite a while back, And in her first interview, she said, "I just wish somebody would give me a chance." Because again, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you get the experience necessary to put on your resume unless somebody gives you permission to enter the room to get the experience to put on your resume?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways, specifically for that scenario of you either have to have adjacent skills that you can say can transfer over, which, because like for me, I'm working on currently attempting to build out a finance profession because right now I'm in between IT jobs. And why did I get into the finance area? Because I have transferable intelligence that can easily be applied to finances because it's one of those that I can think through complex systems. I can break it down into simple steps. I can action those. And you can apply that to almost anything. And because finance is a little bit more on the technical side, I can easily pick it up and move quickly with it. So you either have adjacent skills or you have the ability proven that you can adapt quickly into new scenarios. Because there are some people, actually, one I believe is actually a real story. So there's a movie with Tom Hanks, Catch Me If You Can. I don't remember the name of the real person, but it really comes down to there's this one guy. He realized that he could wash checks and he can basically print money for himself. And he got to the point where he was able to be an airline pilot. He was able to um, print his own checks. He was able to do all these different things, and he even passed the bar exam. And so it's one of those that he didn't have a pilot's license. He didn't know how really money worked, and he had never practiced law ever. But he was able to get through all these different things. And the investigator who was chasing him, he could figure out how he was able to become an airline pilot. He could figure out how he printed checks. He could figure out all this stuff, but he couldn't figure out how he passed the bar. It was just drove him nuts. And this guy, he eventually was caught. And the thing that was the cool part, because he had the skills and the knowledge and the adaptability to transition through all these different roles, he could transition. The reason why he passed the bar is he actually studied and took the test because he was able to adapt into those roles. Uh, but the cool part with this is that guy, he was the one who designed many of the modern security features on checks where you can't wash them.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah, and it really comes down to, can you learn the skill, can you adapt into the skill, or can you make the skill?
Well, and that also, as I mentioned on our previous podcast, in my day job, we're currently interviewing and hiring for 3 different positions, um, and one of a mindset that I have is certain skills can be taught, certain values cannot. Ooh, did I make a rhyme?
I think.
Certain skills can be taught, certain values cannot. Ooh,
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
that's pretty
It's not
catchy.
quite a haiku, but yeah.
I'm like smart, not an imposter. Well, sometimes. But so I've been keeping that in mind as I've been reviewing resumes and interviewing people. I feel like values are often more important than specific skills because certain skills can be taught.
hmm Yeah, and it really just comes down to get around that gatekeeper. You either need to have basically need to know how that gatekeeper works. It's either the experience, or you're able to show the adaptability, or as you said, the values required to be able to meet the position. But that's also one of those that, kind of going off of our last podcast, also there it's one of those that it's probably the most unfair approach to getting a position. Yes, you could be qualified. Yes, you could be the guy they're looking for, but the gatekeeper generally doesn't know what's in the room, and they don't know what's actually let into the room. They just know, do they meet these requirements? Then they go to the next person to let them in. And so it's very interesting how the whole interview process works these
Well,
days.
And I used to judge a million years ago, I used to judge high school speech and debate competitions, and at the higher level debate competitions, the competitors would come in, and before it started, they would ask me as the judge, what is, I don't think I can remember the exact term. I don't think it was rubric, but they asked me what my criteria were for judging them. And that's a smart tool to carry forward also, because if you do need to get past a gatekeeper to get into a room, all metaphorical, why not ask what their criteria is? Why not ask what their metrics are? Why not ask how you will be judged for them to determine whether or not you can gain entry? So I think being curious and asking questions, especially of those gatekeepers, will help you gain skills or transferable skills, translatable, um, to get into the room that you want to gain access to. Because if the gatekeeper is preventing you access, don't accept no. Figure out what it is you need to do to get past the gatekeeper, even if it means sneaking around. No, we wouldn't sneak around the gate. Would we go through a window if the gatekeeper at the door says no?
Sometimes that's how you get in.
Well, and
But
I think that's how the whole self-published industry came to be for writers and authors. You know, there's so many gatekeepers in the publishing industry. A lot of authors are now self-published. They found a window to get in.
yeah, which one of the subtopics that, or not subtopics, one of the topics I was going to bring up, which we'll save for another day because there's plenty of more stuff to go over, is how do you find what you don't, or how do you find what you need that you don't know exists? And because that's really kind of what we're describing is how do you figure out this type of stuff. But that's going to be for, and we might segue back to it, but I want to shift over to our next gatekeeper of, it's adjacent but not quite what I just talked about, where trying to find a organization to fit in with, to be able to learn from it, because it's one of those that I recently signed up to work some search and rescue. I'm still in the onboarding phase, but it's one of those that to be able to join that group, you had to pass a background check and go through some basic training. And so it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm quickly trying to learn how to do those skills. But that can be broadened out to how do you start your own business? How do you um, join a community club? How do you uh, join these community events? And it's one of those that sometimes you need to first find what you're looking for, and then second, be able to pass their requirements. Because another thing that I'm looking at doing is I'm looking at participating in some community pop-up markets, which another term is farmers market, but this one, these aren't intended for farmers, they're just pop-up markets. And also some expos that I'm looking at doing, and they've got rather different but very simple requirements. One is you have to have a fully set up booth. You have to have certain booth requirements. You have to be able to uh, basically provide enough information to see if you fit that market. And then for like expos, one of the things that I thought was kind of hilarious, but the more I thought about it, I'm going to make sense, is for a lot of expos, they require you to have general liability, which the weird part is you're going, because I'm a solopreneur where I go in and I'm the only one. So why do I need general liability for what I do? Because I'm not going to trip and hurt myself, or if I do, it's my fault. But as I was reading through a bunch of the requirements, it's if someone enters your booth, which is your space, and someone gets injured in your booth, the expo doesn't pay for it. Your booth does. And so it's one of those that you're going, it's rather simple requirements, but it's one of those that as you figure out those requirements, you can be let into those various rooms.
Okay, something you said toward the beginning of that was, you know, how do you said something like, how do you find where you fit in? Well, I don't know that that ought to be our goal, but I do think it ought to be a goal of finding your people.
Yeah,
So
and
I don't,
I'll tweak that slightly where it's not so much fit in, but it's where you want to fit in the sense of you can grow into it, and that's where you're not the smartest person in the room and you're growing into being the smartest person in the room.
Because I think we can get caught up sometimes in trying to force ourselves to make ourselves fit in, to make ourselves be acceptable to other people, when I think we ought to latch on to the knowledge that we all belong, we all have a place, we all deserve a seat at the table in any room, really, honestly, maybe. Um, but I don't think we should try to make ourselves fit a mold that somebody else has defined. I think instead we can look for our people, and our people might be oh, that was hard to say. Our people might be people that we want to mentor and help raise up, or our people might be people who, oh wow, I'm like doing tongue twisters, might be people that we want to learn from and grow because we're around them. And but I think that we can join a community without having to force ourselves to fit in to their standards.
Yeah, and there's definitely quite a few different things where you don't have to fit a square hole or a square peg through a round hole, but in some cases you can, depend on their sizes, and sometimes that's actually a benefit because you bring a square structure, bring a round environment, and together you guys can build really cool things. But it really comes down to, don't force the relationship if it's not there. But if you are able to get it and you're able to find that ability to congeal together, then that's a place that you could benefit from. Because kind of like we talked about in the last podcast, is where I had different leadership where they wanted a very specific goal. I said it's not going to happen, and it just got bogged down from there. It's one of those points where you're looking at it and you can either figure out how to work in the same direction, or you need to figure out how to change rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Changing rooms, gatekeepers. Did we talk about, yeah, we talked about why you want to change a room.
Yeah, we haven't talked about why you won't let yourself into a room.
Or, ooh, why you won't let yourself out of a room that no longer serves you.
Hmm.
Yeah. I read this book called The Body Keeps the Score. It was a hard book to read for me. There's this horrible example. I should go back and reread it now that I've been in therapy for 5 million gazillion years. I wonder if my perspective would be different going and rereading the book now. That might be interesting. There's this experiment that's talked about in this book about this dog, and I love dogs. Everybody should be nice to dogs. This experiment about this dog in a kennel, and the poor dog was tortured. And then they opened the doors to the kennel, basically setting the dog free. And the dog chose to stay in the kennel where he had been tortured, which breaks my heart on so many levels. It's something to think about. Why do we choose the familiar that is painful and abusive and torturous over stepping out into the unknown? Why is the familiar the choice instead of stepping out into the unknown?
So, one of the thoughts that comes to mind is the perceived requirement of the commitment. And I say perceived because uh, one of the thoughts is like with marriage, quite a few people stay in it because they got married, when in reality, it's probably not the best environment, but it's one of those that the perceived requirement to be successful in marriage is one reason why people stick around, even though it's probably not the best. But that same thing can apply to being in a job where you're in a very specific position. You feel like if you leave, the entire company is going to fall over, which in some cases that's the case. But if it's destroying you, then it's not worth staying. And so it's,
Oh.
and that's why I say it's the perceived perception, because
Or
in
some
reality, yeah, in reality, it really comes down to everything is changeable, everything is fixable, everything is adjustable, and it really comes down to what adjustments are you okay doing? Because there's some adjustments that by law they're illegal, but if you change countries, they're completely legal, and it really just comes down to why are you staying there? Is it what you perceive is the requirement, or is it the actual requirement? Are you contractually obligated, or are you uh, personally morally obligated? And is that moral obligation binding, or is it one of those that if you shift your focus, you can see how to let yourself out without destroying yourself?
this is a good question. Why do you not let yourself leave the room? That's such a good question. Oh my word. I'm
I had to
stuck
go
in
through answering that one in my personal life, and that's why I have a little bit of perception on it.
well, I'm stuck on that question. I can't leave the room of this question. See what I did there? Because it's a good question. Whatever your room is, whatever your kennel is, whatever your cage is, why if the door is open, why are you choosing to stay instead of leave? And let's say it's not even an abusive kennel. Let's just say that it's just a room. It's just a room with people, and you've come to the realization that the room is no longer serving you. Is that because you're the smartest person or some other reason the room is no longer serving you? Why not go leave and try a different room? I suppose there's an element of, again, the familiarity, the comfort of the known versus the trepidation of the unknown, because stepping off a cliff or stepping out of a room into an unknown hallway, the unknown sometimes can be scary.
Yeah, and since we were talking about weather, I don't remember if it was this episode or last episode, but we're talking about how it's super hot here, and it's warming up there during the winter. Why do people not go outside? Because it's cold. It's a shock. Why do you go outside? Because you need to go get groceries. You need to go do stuff, and so you go face the cold, the uncomfortable, because you need to progress. Here in Texas, we don't go out in the summer. We very much like the winter, except when it gets cold. Um, and cold is relative. But we don't go out in the summer because when it's 100 and something degrees outside, it's uncomfortable to go somewhere. But why do we go outside? Because we got to do stuff. And it really comes down to why should you leave the room you're sitting in? Because there are bigger things to achieve. Yes, you can keep counting beans, but if you go change rooms, you could be counting mountains, you can be counting stars, but it really comes down to what room are you going to, and are you going to keep doing the small stuff, or do you want to go do something bigger?
Well, and you had talked about earlier, you had talked about finding where you fit in. Some, and I know that's not exactly what you meant. Sometimes it's not even a matter of finding your people or finding where you fit in. Sometimes it's about finding an adventure. You talked about counting beans versus counting mountains. Sometimes going into another room gives a grand adventure. So it might not be your people, but think of all that you would learn from them. And it might not be your scene, but think of all the new things you'll see. So changing rooms could simply be an adventure.
Yeah, and as you say that, kind of going back to the generational differences that we talked about in the last episode, so that's where van life is one of the big things. Yes, I know van life's been around for decades, but it's very much gotten a good amount of millennials and Gen Z where they can go out and do whatever they want. They can travel and see the world. But that exact thought of trying something new, that's actually, as I understand it, one of the fueling factors behind what Gen Z and Gen Alpha do around jobs is they'll sample a little bit of everything versus getting pigeonholed in college and where you don't know what you're doing. You're just picking a career off of a list, but they get to go sample a bunch of things, and they may settle on something, or they may blend a couple of things together. And so it really comes down to, yes, you can go sit in a room that you really have no reason to be in there except to learn.
Okay. You are helping me understand what's going on with your generation. I
Grant,
feel
I'm
educated.
millennial. I don't really associate too much with the other ones, even though it's growing.
Well, maybe you should go change rooms and expand your horizons.
I changed rooms for a couple years, and man, I could not understand Gen Z. I started learning how to understand them, but man, they speak a different language.
Yeah, I've had some experience with that recently too. Good gracious. Whew. Okay, so we're considering changing rooms. We've talked about why we're changing rooms. We've touched briefly on imposter syndrome. I think when it comes to imposter syndrome, you just need to fake it till you make it, because anytime we change rooms and we're the new one, the new person, it's going to feel a little awkward, but it's only awkward if you I feel like it's only awkward if you resist it. If you let it just be awkward and acknowledge the awkwardness, then it's like you let the air out of the balloon. It's just no longer awkward. And just let yourself be and get to know the environment and the people.
So here's a really interesting thought. So we're talking one room out, okay? We're just talking changing seats, just something really simple, which changing seats is a complete another topic. But um, if you think in bigger pictures, to get to your end goal or a goal years in the future, how many rooms do you have to change to get to that goal?
I think it depends upon the size of the metaphorical room, and it depends upon how adaptable the environment is, because
Hmm.
could it could be the same room and you knock out a wall and make it a
Or you
little
go
bit
to a different
bigger.
corner.
Or yes, or you open the door and let new people in, and now you're no longer the smartest person in the room. So I think, and maybe it's a generational thing, I think you could achieve your goals if the room is adaptable. But if the room is not adaptable, then you may very well need to leave the room, and you will probably need to taste test some rooms until you find a room that will allow you the growth and opportunity that you want. And then again, it may be your room long term, adaptable, let more people in, expand it, open it, break down a wall. Ooh, there's a whole nother metaphor.
And it's really one of those that the room you're in might be bigger than you think. You just can't
Ah,
see past the first wave of people. But
yes.
it's also, as you said, if you can't figure out how to get the room to work, then you can change. But going back to kind of generational differences, one of the older things is figure out how to make the room work
Hmm.
in one way or another, and versus the just go change rooms, which is more of the modern approach of just change rooms. And millennials sit somewhere in between of I tried to make the room work, but if I can't seem to figure out how to get the room to work, and I've spent time trying to figure out how to get to work, then changing rooms, which is where you're talking about the adaptability. But it really does come down to find the room that you can maximize the room and the room can maximize you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. What else you got?
Uh, that's quite a bit. Granted, there's other topics, but I said we're saving those for other days. But yeah, it's there's definitely a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, you got anything else?
No. So, I mean, the original quote from the previous episode was, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And so we have really explored that. We've gone below the surface. We've kind of delved into it, expanded it, kind of messed around in those weeds. And I think this was a great conversation. Thanks, Mitch. And anybody else, feel free to leave a comment, click a like, click a follow. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of What Else You Got with Mitch and Margot.